In the last section, we spoke about refactoring from traditional promises over to using the improved async await syntax. Let's now apply all that knowledge to our callback function inside of the passport.js file. So as a reminder, I'm inside of services, passport.js, and I'm looking at the second argument to the Google strategy. Now at present, we have our arrow function right here. We've got two different promises in here. One is being used to make a query to the database to find an existing user with a given Google ID. And then the second is being used to create and save a new user to the database. So remember, anytime we touch our database, that is an asynchronous interaction. It always returns a promise, and we have to deal with the promise appropriately. So I want to say that we are going to refactor this function to use the async await syntax rather than the promises that it is using right now. Now, as we do this refactor, we're going to do it somewhat quickly, and I want you to really triple check your code, make sure you've got the same code as I, make sure that you don't have any typos, because of course, any typos is going to lead to an error when you try to test this code out. So let's do the refactor. Let's follow the few steps that we have to go through every time we do it. First off, we're going to identify the function that contains some amount of asynchronous code. And so I'm looking at the arrow function. I'm looking at the arrow function right here. This is the function that contains some asynchronous code. So I'm going to mark the function as being asynchronous in nature. So right before the argument list, I'll place the async keyword. Next, we'll identify all the different promises that are being created inside the function. I see one promise being created right here. So when we do the find one request, I see a second promise being created right here when we call save on the newly created user. So we're going to start off by putting the await keyword in front of each of these requests or each of these promises. So I will say await user.findOne and await new user.save. Next, we're going to do a little bit of new lining and indentation to remove all the .then statements that we have. So I'm going to find the first .then up here. I'm going to put a new line right before it. Notice how when the promise is resolved, we assign the return value to a variable called existing user. So rather than receiving existing user as a new argument or an argument to this function, we will assign the result of await user.findOne to a variable with an identical name. So I will say const existing user equals await blah, 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 like so. We will then clean up the .then statement. I will clean up the closing braces down here that we're matching up to that .then statement. So make sure you find the curly brace parenthesis like so. Clean them up. And then we will indent the remaining logic like so. So now everything is on the same line. Now at this point, we should be able to save this file, and if you are using Prettier, it should not result in any type of error. So if I save the file, I just saved it, and I didn't get any error from Prettier. So if you're using Prettier, good time to save the file or run Prettier and just make sure that you don't have any syntax errors inside of here. So now we're going to do our refactor for the second promise inside of here. So here's await new user. I'm going to put the .save on the same line as the new user creation. So now they're all in the same line. I'm then going to find the .then statement. I'm going to say, rather than allowing the new user to be, or the newly created user to be assigned to this variable user inside the callback function, I will assign it outside of it. So I'll say const user equals await new user dot save. And then we're going to delete the entire .then line and make sure that we bring over the done call as well. So I'll say delete that thing, and then we'll still call done with null and user, like so. Okay, so I'm now going to save this file again. Again, I should not have any errors or any syntax errors at this point in time. So everything in here is looking pretty good. I should be able to flip back over to my terminal, and if I review my running server, I should still see like everything is running. Yes, I know we've got the deprecation warnings, but I should not see any messages saying, oh, hey, you have some error in here. Now at this point, if you do see an error and you see something like oh, unknown keyword async or something like that, or unknown token. I want you to triple check and make sure that you are running an up-to-date version of Node.js. So if you open up a new tab or a new console window and run node-v, if you see anything earlier than version like 7.6 or so, you do not have support for async await. You are running an old version of Node. And remember, the first thing that we did inside this course, we updated our version of Node and made sure that we were running at least version 8 or so. So if you are seeing an error over here that says something like, hey, I don't know what the keyword async means, that means you probably have an old out of date version of Node, and you need to make sure that you update it, because you will not get support for async await until you update your version. So if you need to update Node, if you're seeing that error message, go back to the very first lecture in this course, make sure you update your version of Node and you have at least 8.1.1. Okay, so now back over at our code. We can look at our function now, and visually it looks a lot simpler and a lot more straightforward than what we had before. We can even do a little bit more of a refactor than we have right now. I'm going to say that the refactor I'm about to do is 100% optional, but it's how I would personally write this code out. Okay, so this is going to be an optional refactor. This is going to be what I would personally do inside of here. You'll notice that we have if existing user and then the else case right here. We don't really need the else case here if we make sure that we return when we hit this block. So if I add the return keyword in front of done right here, that will make sure that if we have an existing user, we will not run anything else inside the function. And so then I could remove the else case of the if statement. Of course, we still want the logic in there. We just don't need the actual explicit else. And so when we remove that, thanks to the done or return keyword right here, everything inside of here now gets even more straightforward than before. And if I want to really clean things up, I would even remove the comments. And now, wow, this is remarkably more straightforward and remarkably more simple than what we had before. So that's pretty much it. That is the async await syntax. Again, we're going to use it throughout the rest of this course. 1 or 2 times we might write out some code using promises, but then we'll refactor it immediately over to use the async await stuff instead. So I hope that it's a little bit more clear what's going on here. Let's now continue inside the next section and continue developing the front end of our application.